Hello, my name is Debra Hallow. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Association for Residential Care, JARC, Florida, in Boca Raton, and I moved here from Massachusetts in 1994.
Welcome, Dr. Hallow. It's a
Thank
pleasure
you.
to have you join us
Pleasure
and
to be
hear
here.
the story of JARC. I'll say, first of all, that I am Sandy Altner. I am a volunteer interviewer with the Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum, and we are here at the lovely studios of Lynn University in the library. And today is August 17th, 2016. And it's there are many, many stories to tell about JARC, but first of all, I would like to know a little bit about how it is that you came to live here. Who came with you?
My family came with me. I actually came quite reluctantly. We lived in Massachusetts. I planned on spending the rest of my life there until my husband said, "Guess what?" And he received a promotion in the company that he worked for, where he would be the chief financial officer of their Latin American division, which was based here in South Florida. We moved with our daughter Robin.
What's your husband's name?
Edward. And I have to tell you honestly, for the first 2 years of living here, I would have packed night and day to go back to Massachusetts.
Where did you live first? Where was your first home in Florida?
The same one that I have now. When we moved here, people laughed at us because, you know, we're from New England and you could have a one-bedroom house on 5 acres. And so we said we wanted property, and when they finished laughing, but we were very fortunate to have a family friend who knew the area well. We live in West Boca Raton, and we were very concerned about the school for our daughter, who had a learning disability, and we didn't want to be on top of our neighbors, and we live in a beautiful community with 1.5 acres of property. Most people say, "Are you crazy?" But we love it.
You moved here in what year then?
Actually, I went to JARC in 94, and so I guess we moved here in 1992.
How long did it take you to come to the idea that you didn't have to be packing your bags to be going back?
When JARC and I met each other. And the interesting piece or caveat to that is right around that time, my husband had the opportunity to relocate back to New England. And by then I said, "Well, you be sure to write."
Tell me how you came to JARC. What were the circumstances that led? First of all, let's hear a little bit about your background, and then we'll see why that was such a good fit.
I never wanted to do anything other than work with people with disabilities. At that time, people referred to as people with mental retardation. And even through high school, I knew that that was going to be, where I was going to spend my professional career. I worked in a state facility in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Walter E. Fernald State School, that had the very dubious distinction of being the first institution in the Western Hemisphere for the purposes of segregating people who were then referred to, when it was founded in the 1800s, as feeble-minded from the general community. When I went to work at Fernald in 1975, right after I got married, there were 2,500 adults living there. The turnover rate in direct service was 400%, so for most positions, they were filled 4 times in 1 year. And to call the wards deplorable, I could explain to you, Sandy, what they looked like, but I could never explain to you what the stench was. And it was the stench of humanity abandoned. Bathrooms with no toilet seats, with no toilet paper, showers that had stopped working probably the year I was born, and the way that one showered adults, women, men, and children who lived in the facility was with a garden hose. It was the best experience of my life.
How so?
I learned lessons that you can only learn from experience, and I think the most important lesson I learned was humility. Because, sorry, I get emotional even now. Why those families? Why was I blessed with a healthy family? Why were my parents blessed with a healthy family? Why? You know, um, it could be anybody, and it was. It was anybody. Um, People with education, people who are not educated. Uh, a developmental disability is and always has been an equal opportunity destroyer. It destroys hopes, it destroys dreams, it destroys aspirations. But for me, what it did for me in that setting was, and again, understand I was 21, 22 years old, I was changing the world. And in fact, I was never so smart as I was at 22. I had just graduated college magna cum laude. I had just gotten married to the love of my life, and I was going to fix the world. When I went to work at the facility, many of the people I worked with were young, idealistic people such as myself. In fact, there was a group of us, 4 of us, who referred to ourselves as the Jew crew. And we had that same passion for social action. We did things with the women on our ward. Now, I worked in a building where there were 4 wards, A, B, C, and D, each had 100 women. So in this one building, there were 400 women housed. The ratio for the shift that I worked on when it was not a good day was sometimes 1 to 50 or 1 to 100. There were 7 pieces of furniture for 100 women. The television, I have no idea when it worked, but we took the women out into the community. We took and spent our paychecks buying supplies so we could help educate and stimulate them. Things, frankly, that the Commonwealth didn't do for this particular population because they were throwaway people. So from that perspective, it gave me a very unique perspective on what dignity should be and what happens when dignity is abandoned.
Tell me a little bit about the Jew crew. Was that just because people were Jewish, or because the teachings of Judaism were involved in the way you were viewing the situation?
Well, I think it was both. It happened to be 4 young Jewish, 2 men and 2 women, and we all came from similar idealistic backgrounds when it had to do with repairing the world, and I believe it's the reason that brought every one of us there. In later years, I obviously stayed in this field. One of my colleagues became an attorney, but his specialty was assisting families in working through the system for their adult child with disabilities. Another one of my colleagues became a psychologist, and the practice that he specialized in was helping families and young people with developmental disabilities.
Dr. Hallow, when you first came to Boca Raton and you disliked it, can you describe to me, because we're doing this project regarding the Jewish oral history here in Boca Raton, was your sense of Judaism being met in the way that you wanted it to be? Was that a factor when you first moved to Boca Raton? What kind of Jewish community did you find to greet you?
I found a very welcoming one. In fact, where I lived in Massachusetts in Worcester County, while there's a large Jewish community, in my particular town there wasn't. And this opportunity, when Jark and I found each other, was the first place I ever worked where I said Happy New Year in September, and people understood what I was saying. And I felt at home. I felt at home from the standpoint of my Yiddishkeit. But I didn't feel at home for the rest of me.
So that was because of the New England part of you, not the Jewish part of you.
Correct.
So the Jew found her home here.
She did, but she still misses leaves that change in October.
Okay. Tell us now about how you came to have this relationship with Jark. How did you meet Jark?
Well, it was kind of interesting. I began work in another program that served people with disabilities in Boca Raton that was not Jewish affiliated. But I met the director of that facility at the time, She and I became colleagues and friends. And at a particular point, she moved on in her career and asked if I would be interested in coming to JARC. I didn't have to think twice about that. I knew that that's where I needed to be. I knew that the reason I was in this field had very little to do with me and had everything to do with how I was directed spiritually. My mother of blessed memory had a sister who would have been well into her 90s if she were alive today, who became ill as an infant and became severely disabled. She didn't walk, she didn't talk, she couldn't feed herself, take care of herself in any way. And my grandparents, immigrants to this country, did not seek out a facility like the Fernald School, and every state had them, but kept her home in a loving, caring home. I never knew her, I never met her. She passed away when she was 12 years old, but I know that she guided my direction.
When you came to JARC, what was the circumstance? You were coming because you were asked to consider a position?
I was asked to consider the position, but I was told by the director, she said, you need to meet the founder of JARC because if he doesn't like you, this isn't going to happen. I was a little nervous about that. And she said, he's a very tough person. Again, I spoke to my mother, and she, a woman of amazing insight and wisdom, said, well, this man is going to interview, correct? I said, yeah, that's the whole point. She said, interview him. She said, assure yourself that he's the kind of person you want to work for. It had never occurred to me. And the founder of JARC, Dr. Mel Clayman, a man of blessed memory as well, I met him at the appointed date and time. And what struck me when I first met him, he was a very striking man, very, very, very tall, very urbane looking, very attractive. But what I saw was that he had the saddest eyes I had ever seen. We chatted. He talked a lot about JARC. And after a time, he said, would you like to meet the residents? I had a feeling things were going good by then. And I always kind of joke and tell myself and others, there's a woman who still lives at JARC, who lived there then, whose name is Robin. And I really attribute my being considered for the position to JARC resident Robin. Because when we went over to meet them, this was during a Israel Independence Day celebration, all the residents were there. What Dr. Clayman didn't, I think, seem to know was that I already knew all of them because of the facility that I worked at, which was, at that time, the only option for people with disabilities. They didn't have a choice. There was one facility. If you were handicapped, that's where you worked. Well, I worked there, and so did the JARC residents. So we are going over to this area where they all are, all of the residents, and instead of running over to see Dr. Clayman, the first thing Robin said is, Mel, I didn't know you knew Debbie Hallow. Well, I think he had a whole different outlook at that point. Then, of course, they chatted. And what I saw, and this really is, I think, one of the things that made me feel this is a man I want to work with. His whole demeanor changed. The sadness in his eyes was gone. He was so delighted to be with the JARC residents, and they were so delighted to be with him. I went home. My mother asked how the interview went, and I told her about the sadness that I saw, and she again said, well, do you have any idea what that means? I was like, not really. She said, probably that he feels life very deeply. And then I found out that his son Barry was the reason that he began the program, and his son had passed away just a few years before that in 1991.
What is JARC?
Well, that's a hard question. I guess I'd have to answer that by saying what it was and what it's become. When Dr. Clayman originally approached the Jewish Federation, with the concept for JARC. He was concerned, obviously, for a home for his son and others with disabilities, not for the now, but for the later. Again, a man of incredible vision, who realized, as all parents with a child with developmental disabilities realizes, is they have to plan for 2 lifetimes. The one during theirs, but the one that they are most concerned about is the lifetime that will continue when they're no longer here to be caregivers. So JARC was about now, but it was about then. And his concept was a residential home, a home that any of us would want to live in, a home where the residents become a family, not related by blood, but related in every way that a family is related. Still very involved with their family of origin, but again, where the parents are concerned, the parents knowing that their children will be loved and cared for in a nurturing home for the rest of their lives. And that was the beginning. And Dr. Clayman was very meticulous about everything. The homes are not homes that we purchase and renovate. And somebody gets the bigger bedroom, maybe has 2 or 3 people living in it because it's a big bedroom. We build our homes, so everybody has a private bedroom. There's a common area for recreating. There's a common dining area that's rather large so that people can spread out and help prepare the meals and learn skills. Being involved in recreational ventures within the community was also very important. Being tied to our faith was very important. Our initial and continuing long-term relationship has always been with Temple Bethel here in Boca Raton. Segue to now, where the organization has expanded to include the general community, not just our residential aspect, though we have 10 residential homes now located in Boca Raton and Delray Beach. On the campus of the Jewish Federation, we have a supported living apartment program for people that don't need the same kind of support that people in our residential homes require, people who have the ability to have more independent access to the community, but still needing a great deal of support. And I think the piece that really changed us significantly is the Melanie Edith Clayman Training and Resource Center, because that is a community facility. People come for work skills, they learn culinary arts, they learn environmental and housekeeping, they learn to operate in a fulfillment center, doing assembly and packaging. There is computer-assisted learning, but it is a focal point for social, recreational, and supports, both for the clients through various support groups that actually we do in partnership with students from Lynn University and Florida Atlantic University. And it's a gathering place for families. So I really see us as the central address for people with disabilities in our community.
When we look at the changes and what was immediately appealing to you when you had that first conversation with Dr. Clayman, what was it that you knew made this a good fit for you, as your mother had instructed you to be very careful about?
Again, coming from where I did in Massachusetts and seeing the embrace that the community had for men and women with special needs, not seeing them as them and us, but seeing everyone as part of the same community, looking at the quality of life that people in the residential homes at JARC lived, and listening to the vision that Dr. Clayman and the board of directors had for the continued growth of the agency, I knew that it was the right fit.
When we look at what JARC is today, and I've had the privilege, of course, to spend some time in the residential homes and to get to know some of the residents. When we look at the home, what we're seeing is it's beautifully decorated. There's granite, there's there are big windows. There are the eating space that you're talking about isn't like a cafeteria. It's a large kitchen. So when you have all of those things, and what is the response of the residents to that? What can you tell me about the residents and their lives at JARC?
Well, I'll tell you something interesting even before that. When Dr. Clayman would approach friends and potential supporters, initially they were very skeptical, saying, why are you spending all this money? They're going to have the houses looking, you know, they don't know how to take care of. It's going to be a mess. You're spending all this money for what? And one of the things that was important to Mel was windows. If you look in our homes, there's lots of them and they're big. If you look at our learning center, there's lots of them and they're big. He wanted to have the brightness flowing into the homes. Now again, coming from where I did in Massachusetts, there was no brightness. There was a lot of darkness, but no brightness. The homes are professionally appointed by decorators because again, his concept was, this is the home that we would want any of our children to live in. We as parents are very fortunate with our children who are typical. I don't usually use the word normal. I like the word typical because I don't know what normal means, but I know what typical means. You can help them go to college. You can help them with their career. You can help them purchase their first home. You have nachas from their children. Those things are not likely to happen when you have a child with disabilities. However, we as the community have the opportunity, and more importantly, we have the obligation to provide the kind of home that anybody wants to live in. And so that was his direction. Well, when our residents come into the home, they appreciate that. They take care of, they all have chores that they're responsible for. They're very proud. You know, clients will tell you things like, you know, I get the mail every day. You know, I bring out the rubbish every day. You know, I help set the table. So it's their home and they're a part of it. They have their rooms appointed very personally, mementos that are meaningful to them. Each bedroom has, you know, their signature as far as what the colors of the bedspreads are and the, you know, the accoutrements in the room. So for our residents, it's home. You know, I don't know how to describe it better.
And who is there to look after them in the home?
In our residential homes, we're staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as long as there's a resident in residence. Now, during the day, our clients go to work, go to recreational programs, so the staff are not required to be there. But if somebody's homesick or for any reason, there is a staff in residence. In our apartment program, people do not require that same level of supervision. So there is not always 24-hour supervision. In the homes, activities end at 9 p.m. Now people can stay up and watch TV in their rooms, do whatever they want. In the apartments, again, people may be out in the community still. Some of the people drive. Others know how to take transportation publicly, which is not the skill sets of the people who live in the residential homes.
What has been the reaction from parents who have searched to find the right place, who have searched to find a place that, if it could possibly be Jewish, would be a benefit to them and to their children or their child that they're looking to have in the right situation? What has been the reaction to JARC from people who have placed their children there?
You know, we had a mother, a single mother who has a son who's living in our apartments, and she talked about, and this to me is just horrible that a parent would think this, that if she knew it was near her death, she would take her son with her, because who was going to love him? Who was going to care for him? Who was going to nurture him? And when she found JARC, she said, it was the light. I knew that my son would be safe for the rest of his life, and I knew that both of us would have freedom. You know, it's kind of like almost like the Exodus. when you went from, having no hope to now having hope and freedom.
This has been a major achievement for the Jewish community here in Florida, to create JARC, to support JARC, to grow JARC. Tell me about how important it has, how has that been able to happen? Because obviously a lot of money needed to be raised to make this possible. How did that happen?
The first thing that comes to my mind is Dr. Mel Klayman, who not only had a vision but had a business plan. And so he approached it, I would say, somewhat differently than many who look at a charity. He looked at this charity right from the beginning as a business and needed to ensure that there was a strong foundation, and so was very concerned with reaching out to the community to have endowment funds that would assure JARC's financial stability. So he, going from being a dentist, and I'm told by others a very good one, together with his brother Stanley, they had a practice in Bethesda out of the Washington area, going into construction and real estate with his brother Stanley, and then becoming a fundraiser and having no experience doing that, but having the passion for the mission. So I think the most important thing was the financial stability and foundation. Well, how does that happen? It happens by reaching out to the community and assisting people who, in many cases, in most cases, did not have a family member with disabilities, but understanding the importance of this to the community, the obligation that the Jewish community had to assist in repairing the world, the obligation that we have as Jews. We are responsible one for the other. And he reached out, and people heard him. And they heard him with their hearts, but they also heard him with their checkbooks.
When we look at what JARC does, and I have to just say the joy that I see in the residents when I come to visit, there's always a sense of hustle and bustle and happiness and people telling stories about what they're doing, and there's laughter and there's friendship. When you see that in contrast to what you knew as a 22-year-old change the world young woman, what are you most, how do you see it? How do you see what you're doing?
Being a part of JARC and creating what we in this community have created is probably the thing I'm most proud of, next to the birth of my daughter, because both were creating life when there was none. And I guess that's the difference. There was no life at Fernald. People lived, but there was no life. There were people that spent, I guess a shift was 8 hours, just going around and around in circles all day. There was a woman who spent the whole shift in the ward bathroom, which had absolutely no privacy. There was a trickle of water that came from one of the long disrepaired shower heads, just this one trickle. And she would just kneel there naked and just feel the water coming down. That one trickle of water. That was life, but it wasn't living. And then you segue to JARC, where, let's see, our clients in the homes, in October, one group will be going to Walt Disney World for vacation. One group will be going to a dude ranch for vacation. One group will be going on a cruise for vacation. That's just the family vacation. Trip to Lion Country Safari not long ago. Trip to the Kennedy Space Center, I actually think today. Being a part of the community, being, out and about. One of the things that we talk about at JARC is that we have extraordinary people who, because of JARC, can lead an ordinary life. The things that you and I do, and we don't think about it. Going out with your friends, going to the cinema, going to the mall, going out to dinner. Those were things I never saw, and I worked at Fernal for 11 and a half years.
How different then is JARC in terms of providing services to a disabled community from what else is out there in America?
There are many fine programs throughout the country, but there are many programs that are seriously lacking, where people receive 3 meals a day and a roof over their head and very little stimulation. I think the uniqueness of JARC, and there are not many programs that not only have the residential piece, but what are you going to do when you're not at home? The vocational piece, both teaching skills, but a program that we implemented last year and this year received funding from the state of Florida for our JARC Works program, to have people with disabilities going into competitive work environments with a staff person, earning minimum wage while they're being trained, and once they're trained, being hired by the company. We have people at Marshall's, we have people at TJ Maxx, we have people at the Cheesecake Factory, we have people at the Grand Lux Cafe, we have people at the Boca Beauty Academy here, and we have people at the Arthur Murray Dance Studios. They're learning the skills to work in the general community. I think that's extraordinary.
I think it is too. And when we look at how JARC has been part of the shaping of the Boca Raton community, let's talk a little bit about how that has happened, about what you had talked earlier about how you felt there was a very welcoming Jewish community here for you. What is JARC then to the Jewish community today and to the philanthropic community?
I think for many people who are philanthropic, because they have told me this, it's one of the charities that is very personal because they see where the money is going. They see how it's changing lives. We invite our donors to come to events so that they can participate and be a part of the residents' lives. Every year we have a bowling tournament, actually named in memory of one of our residents who was a very avid bowler. And we invite families and friends and supporters. We have an annual gala where all of our residents come as guests of JARC. Well, we have over 100 residents. That's a lot of guests. But people get to see how they're enjoying and how they're participating and how their lives have been enriched, and how, again, they see themselves as us, we, not them. And unfortunately, I have to tell you, I don't think enough people know about JARC. And whenever I have to say that, I have to add to that, shame on us. So getting the name out, getting the mission out to the community is a very vital piece of what we do. Now, one of the things that Jewish people like to do is talk, argue, and eat. We have a wonderful kosher cafe called Cafe 95. And that's spreading the word because people in the community are using us to cater events, to provide their Shabbat dinners for them, to have events in our facility. And so what we're doing is teaching our clients skills that now transfer to places like Grand Lux Cafe and the Cheesecake Factory. But what happens on a daily basis at the training center in Cafe 95 is our clients with special needs learn these skills, and people in the community interact with them as professionals. You know, they're the ones that are preparing the daily lunches. When you order salmon, they're the ones that are preparing it. They're the ones that are packaging the meals for the kosher food pantry that is run by the Ruth and Norman Rails Jewish Family Services. When we began that program in partnership with JFS, there were about 40, 50 meals that we were providing. We provide over 600 meals on a regular basis to the community through JARC.
This is all a great dream that has come to reality largely because of the Jewish community getting behind it. What was Jewish Federation's role in getting JARC out the door and up and running?
The first founding director of the Jewish Federation, Rabbi Bruce Warshall, was very involved in the founding, the genesis, if you will, of the agency. The relationship with the Federation was a very different one then, because there was one 501c3 status that all of the agencies that are still on the campus worked under, and we were known as the Jewish Federation doing business as JARC, or doing business as the Levis JCC, and so on. In 2001, each of the agencies became separate 501c3 organizations. So the relationship changed. The Federation is no longer in the role of parent. What does the Federation do? Well, I think one of the important things that it does is educate. You can't participate in something or believe in something until you know what it is. And through the Federation's Discovery Days, every one of those Discovery Days ends at JARC. And people will say things like, they saved the best for last, I never knew. So the education piece is very important. The Federation does assist financially. The preponderance of our budget, however, comes from our own fundraising and the fees for services that we receive.
There were many, many people that got involved in this, as you described, who just were so passionate about seeing JARC's success from the very beginning. People like Anita Shalley and people like the Claymans and people like the Railses and so on, to make sure that this was going to be out there. And many, many people who never sought to be recognized. Can you tell me about those volunteers?
There's far more of those that are the unsung heroes. People would used to joke about Mel. It's like, oh my God, if they saw him coming down the street, they knew what was happening next. But what he would often do was say, just come for a ride with me. I want to show you something. And he'd bring them to one of our residential homes. Just come for Shabbat dinner. Just one dinner. And they were hooked. And these are people that have given of their time, of their philanthropy, of their knowledge, their expertise, and continue to do that. Believe it or not, we're going into our 31st year, and we still have people who got involved 30 years ago that are still as passionate about JARC now, or perhaps even more than they were then.
I have one other question for you. When you look at JARC and how it has grown in Boca Raton, which is has a very substantial Jewish community, how has JARC enhanced the Jewish community and the wider community, perhaps, in shaping what Boca Raton is?
You ask hard questions. I think one of the most important things that just by being on this campus and interacting with the general community, that we've done for the young people, the children in our day schools, is they've learned something very substantial. And they've learned that not all Jewish kids become doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. They've learned perhaps the lesson that I learned at 22. They've learned the beginning of humility. They've certainly learned the beginning of empathy. We have so many students from the day schools that volunteer. It might begin with a mitzvah project for B'nai Mitzvot. It might begin because their brother or sister volunteered. The schools are very invested in having their children learn about a different segment of the community that we're responsible for. So I think that, you start with the children. If you want to teach the parents, teach the children. I think that's incredibly significant. We are non-sectarian. Families that are not of the Jewish faith flock to us because they know these are the services that they want for their child. We have a family whose son lives in our supported living apartments, and they're of the Catholic faith. He wears a cross. Every day he's on the phone with his mother at the end of the day, and they pray together. He works at his church. And she said, you know, I think if my church started a program, I would never remove my son from JARC, because this is his family. This is where he belongs. I think in many ways JARC teaches us the essence of what brotherhood is supposed to be.
Thank you. When we look at the long journey that you had from those experiences, those dark experiences in Massachusetts, to coming here, and in between with falling in love with JARC to the point where you were saying to your husband, oh, if you're going to go back to Massachusetts or New England, please write.
He didn't go, by the way.
When you think about how JARC changed your life, what are you most pleased with, most proud of?
Well, if I have to look at my career, I have to tell you honestly, the thing that I'm the most proud of is that I was the best ward attendant the ladies on Ward A had, because they learned something. If they didn't know how to bathe themselves, at least they knew now, because of me, how to take a washcloth and make that connection, how to take the connection that their hair and the soap interact with each other, how to use a toilet appropriately. Those are the things that I'll take to my grave with me. But then when I look at JARC, and I look at how I came from there, and I was able to help be a part and create a vision for every family who utilizes our resources, every family who comes to us, like that mother I spoke about, and said, I have no hope. What happens when I'm gone? Knowing that every one of those parents is when they go to Hashem, they're going to go with a little bit of peace of mind because of JARC. And knowing when I walk into the building, you know, it's not a panacea, you know, it's real world. People get in fights, people argue with each other, you know, this one says that, and that one says this, and this one says no. But when I see that, which is regular, it's typical, that's what's supposed to happen. When I see people working hard and playing together and laughing together, I don't have a way to quantify that. I just know that that's what's supposed to happen, that people with disabilities are supposed to lead ordinary lives. And I get to be a part of that.
Thank you so very much.
My pleasure.